Good evening, Scotland. Good evening, social media land. I hope you are well. It is Friday, the 11th of November 2022, and it feels very strange and itchy being on YouTube compared to TikTok right now. It's like, whoa, I don't know if this is going to work. Hey, Druss, I see you in the chat there. Amazing. Thank you for coming in, sort of migrating across here for tonight. That's okay. Listen, you just go back to your bed, brother. I can see that there. If people don't come across here, I'm absolutely fine with it because we're recording it, and it will also be up on the live, and it gives me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do last night, which is fine. And even if we get taken down tonight, I am going to continue recording because the show must go on. For those people that didn't know what's happened, I've moved across here for a couple of days just to see what was going on with doing a live on YouTube compared to doing one on TikTok, because the past two nights over on the Tick of Talks, even though I was using videos that were available on TikTok, I got brought down by people complaining about me breaching copyright things with them. So I can understand if people want to go and do that. That's cool. I totally get that, and I'm fine with that. However, it wasn't really copyrighty, because it was a straight up things that were available on TikTok and available in the public sphere anyway, because it's like kind of like news articles and stuff that I was using. So we're just going to do the same show as we did last night. And if Druss, if you're in the background here just now, that's cool, man. It's really nice to have you here. If you're still just dropping in there, like I say, I hope that the immigration laws coming from TikTok to YouTube are not as strict as the immigration laws for people trying to seek asylum in the UK. Okay, so what are we going to do? Shall we begin? Let's have a quick look down here. Yeah, so TikTok lives were great because I was using a piece of software called TikTok Live Studio, which was amazing. And it allowed me to do such things as jingles and sort of things that would be going between different sort of like segments of the show. So it was like pretty much like a quite a groovy show, to be perfectly honest. But for some reason, some people didn't like the message, but the message can't be stopped. All right, the message can't be stopped because there's other platforms and there's other places to go and do this. So for anybody that's in the chat here just now that may have turned around and reported me to TikTok for breach of copyright, that's cool. You're allowed to do that. Okay, but it doesn't stop the message, guys and girls. It really doesn't. So I can see just now that there is 3 people watching this live. Say hello. You're allowed to. It's okay. I don't bite, and it's nice to have positive interaction. And let's just do this little thing first. The Saltire is also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. You will find the links to follow us on all of them at www.thesaltire.scot/media. So tonight's show is specifically all about the broad shoulders of the Union. And we're going to discuss that in a couple of different sort of segments: financial, defence, a few other things. And it's just to provoke a thought process, a way of thinking about the Union, not so much in a negative way, but in a critical thinking, realistic sort of way. So what are the broad shoulders of the Union? This is the claim that devolved nations work better together, that old chestnut, and can rely on one another in need. This is the claim that the devolved nations would struggle without the broad shoulders of the Union. But there's only one nation that's actually saying that, and we know which nation that is. And it's not even really the nation that's saying that, it's really Westminster that's saying that, and a few people within the nation. I would probably say, if you put to the English people, should Scotland be independent, they would probably say, well, they should be able to turn around and choose. You know, we get a few people saying, no, 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 you can't do that. But it is our right to choose. Anyway, it's said that financially Scotland would never be able to afford to be independent, and it would have to rely on these shoulders to make up the difference in adequate spending versus what we generate as an income. However, it can be proven that the Scottish Government has been quoted saying that Scotland presently generates enough revenue from taxation and national insurance to comfortably pay all of the presently devolved financial responsibilities. And we also pay enough national insurance contributions to pay all of our social security responsibilities, including pensions, with a wee bit left over as well. Couple this with a fiscal policy that is specifically tailored to Scotland's needs, us making our own decisions, the ability to borrow like any normal independent country and invest in the nation with this borrowing, and a strong currency of our own, and being part of, in some way, that will allow us to trade freely again with the EU, then truly the broad shoulders of the Union can't be a financial one. You know? Hi Robert, how are you? Let me bring up the chat window here just now. Is that coming up there? Nope, we might have to change the way the chat works just now, because it's not popping up on the screen there just now. It should be, but it's not. I can see you, Robert. Let me just take that chat off the camera window there just now. Stay strong and keep the message alive, man. Thank you, Robert. I genuinely appreciate that. That means a big deal to me. Somebody turning around and saying that, which is cool. Anyway, one of the biggest questions we get throwing back at us about Scotland being financially strong enough to turn round and support itself is just recently during the COVID years about the furlough scheme. So what about, COVID and the furlough scheme? Scotland would never have been able to do that on its own. Oh, are you mental? How could we not do that on our own? An independent Scotland would have been able to easily have borrowed for a furlough scheme of its own. And let me repeat what I just said a minute ago. Scotland presently generates enough revenue from taxation and national insurance to comfortably pay all of its present devolved financial responsibilities. And we pay enough national insurance contributions to pay all of our social security responsibilities, including pensions, with a bit left over. Couple this with a fiscal policy specifically tailored to Scotland's needs, the ability to borrow like any other normal independent country and invest with that borrowing like any normal independent country, having a strong currency of our own, one that people want to trade with, and being part of in some way back with the EU, trading freely with them, then we're going to be a bit okay. It's not as doom and gloom as what people think. And then, when this argument comes up, people would start saying, yeah, but you'll never get into the EU. You'll never be able to do this. You'll never be able to do that. That opens up a can of worms that we can talk about on TikTok Lives in a wee debate. Okay, we're not here to talk about that tonight. So we're going to play a video now, and I want to point out to everybody watching it, this video is freely available across all social media. It doesn't really have any markers on it for anything that's copyrighted, because it's been used by many creators in the sense to convey a message. It's a strung together pieces of negativity put together by people, politicians, and soundbitey type people being a bit negative about Scotland. So let's watch it, and we'll discuss this after.
Some people say that we're not a Scottish party. Time and again, the Scottish ministerial team have richly earned the collective title, which I believe some jealous Sassenachs imposed upon them. That of the Tartan Mafia.
I do think it pretty monstrous that you have free care for the elderly in Scotland and no tuition fees, no top-up fees, when you still get considerable subsidies from the rest of the UK, and in particular from England, and in particular from London, which contributes net 18 billion to the UK economy. So, you know, I do think that it might be a good thing if the Scottish Parliament used its tax-varying policies, tax-varying powers, to pay for them themselves.
Did they not have a point that perhaps it was their oil, most of it was just off the shore of Scotland?
Well, they had the point if they were as greedy as sin as they were. I mean, the only thing that fueled nationalism was the smell of oil and money in oil. I mean, it really is the most monstrous piety on their part to say that they are true upholders of the saltire and God knows what. They were after brass, and not let's kid ourselves.
But I suppose it gave the argument credibility for the first time.
Well, certainly it did. I mean, it was an entirely credible argument. We want money for Scots, and blow the English and the Welsh. Oh, yes, but that I think would now be described as greed.
And it was the home of Oliver Cromwell, who defeated the Scots at Dunbar, incorporated Scotland into his protectorate, and transported the Scots as slaves to the colonies.
I say to the SNP, now is not the time.
Whilst Nicola Sturgeon was doing daily press conferences wanting them in a permanent lockdown. So I think she's very often wrong, she's always moaning, and that we need to focus on how the union benefits people.
You're very aware of how comments like that and what Liz Truss said last night only calcify the feeling in Scotland that they want to separate from.
No, they don't. What they do is the SNP gets very cross. Well, of course the SNP gets cross. Its permanent default state is a state of mild fury, a lot of it confected. What we need to do is make the arguments about why the United Kingdom is successful for the people of Scotland.
The bonds of the United Kingdom have weakened over the past 12 years of Conservative government, and if you look at Northern Ireland or Scotland, independence is very much a question again. And you know, what is your plan to reverse that? I'm not sure. I don't suppose you are planning to build any walls.
No, I would. And I think the best thing to do with Nicola Sturgeon is ignore her. I think she's...
Difficult when she's First Minister, though. She's got a democratically elected position, just as you would.
I'm sorry, she's an attention seeker, Seb. That's what she is. And what we need to do is show the people of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales what we are delivering for them.
That's an absolute no to another independence referendum whenever you are Prime Minister. There you are.
Those were the broad shoulders of the union at work there, turning round and explaining exactly what they think of Scotland. It can be a bit disheartening when you hear such things coming from the people that are supposed to be our brothers and sisters in the union. It's quite terrible, to be perfectly honest. It's heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking for the Scottish Unionists as well, that feel that they want to be part of this historic thing that has existed for a very long time. And I get how they're upset and frustrated, but when you look at the union now, it's not great, and you can't turn round and say the broad shoulders of the union is something that is real. So if the broad shoulders of the union are not financial, then perhaps it's something to do with security. Personally, I only feel that the only sort of real security threat that we have here in Scotland would be an attack on Faslane, where the UK keeps their nuclear deterrent. But I'm totally sure that it's quite secure. And, once independence comes, it's something that will be at top of the agenda to negotiate a way to some unfortunate country somewhere else willing to host these barbaric weapons until the rest of the UK can put something together that is adequate for storing them again. So those using the broad shoulders of the Union as a reason to hold this Union together like to suggest that Scotland would also not be in NATO if we were independent. And being able to lean on these broad shoulders guarantees membership as part of the Union. Well, cast your mind back to 2014 when the Better Together campaign said that the only way to remain as part of the EU was to be part of the Union. How did that go? 62% of Scots ripped away from the EU like a cheap waxing of the undercarriage. Yes, I said that. Ripped away, brutally leaving scabs and the potential of ingrown hairs. All right? That's how I feel about it. Now 72% of us want to return, but that's a whole different story that we can talk about. We're talking about being an independent nation and being told that we can't be part of NATO. So let me put this to you just now. Do you think that NATO members, specifically America, will want to leave the North Atlantic Passage unprotected or monitored by a state from radar stations called Saxe-Savoord and Carmen Moore? That's two radar stations that monitor that all-important part of the North Atlantic, the part where we see ships come round from the Arctic Circle from Russia and planes frequently traverse into them. Do you think that they're going to want these particular things manned by a non-NATO member? I don't think that they would. I really, really don't think that it would. We don't have a military, I hear people cry. You don't have ships or planes to intercept. It's, yeah, but NATO does. And if the Union want to spit the dummy and remove the rapid reaction jets from Scottish bases after independence, I'm sure that some other NATO country would just love to station their jets in Scotland, at least until we built our own. You see, it's not all about the Union and what it has or what it can take away. It's about being reasonably intelligent about stuff. It's about the global stage and where Scotland fits in strategically upon that stage. These sort of points are ridiculous, and with just a small time spent with a little bit of critical thinking, any reasonable person could come to a sensible conclusion that Scotland, without the broad shoulders of the Union, would remain quite secure. The nonsense that is spouted from the mouths of Union folk that think they know better is very similar to Nigel Farage when he tried to ask a pertinent question of Scotland's finances.
How?
Oh, did that not?
How would Scotland, separated, how would it pay the bills?
Well, you'd have to ask the same question of Finland, you'd have to ask the same question of Iceland, the same question of Sweden, of Portugal, of everybody else. And you should know, of course, that since 1945 the UK hasn't paid the bills at all. It's been putting on loan and loan and loan, debt and debt and debt, and it's only paid back about 1.7% of all monies borrowed in the last 70 to 80 years. So to ask Scotland how would they pay the bills when the UK hasn't paid its own bills, I find is a bit rich. What we do see round about us is the prosperity of Ireland having left the UK. There's the prosperity of Norway with its oil reserves and doing a lot for the green agenda as well. We're seeing how Iceland's getting on with the population of Dundee, and we're seeing how Scotland's getting on with a government we don't vote for, a government we haven't voted for, a party we haven't voted for since 1955. I've no worries about how Scotland will get on after independence. I just don't think we'll be needing to send too many food parcels south of the border, Nigel.
Angus McNeill, thank you for coming and joining us.
That was brilliant. Listen to Angus just put Nigel right in his place. For some reason, I'm not being able to broadcast the chat live just now, but I'm looking at what Robert, a good friend of mine, just said. He says Scotland was always the guinea pig state. Poll tax is a fine example. And disgusting, those comments I just saw in your montage. Well, what were these comments across in TikTok, Robert? Is that where they were? Let me know, okay, where you saw them, because it would be interesting to go and get screen captures of them and show the world what people actually say about Scotland. Okay, what is the next little bit here then that we're going to talk about? Okay, so we have discovered, by applying a little bit of common sense and a bit of critical thinking, that the broad shoulders are not truly based around finances and security. So let's run down a few other potential candidates for what the broad shoulders may actually mean. Let's start with a strong and trusted currency. Nah. The pound goes up and down depending on the whims of the ruling Westminster Party. We experienced it tanking just recently and almost taking the nation's pensions with it until the Bank of England stepped in. You've got to remember that, okay? That whole Liz Truss, Quasimodo, what was his name? Quasi-Quartic, whatever his name was, right? Experiment in growth. Wow, it really made the markets a bit nervous, so that strong and stable, strong currency thing is kind of like, well, they've discovered that the world doesn't see it that way all the time, which is kind of crazy, to be perfectly honest. The next bit about the pound is, now that the trust is kind of been eroded a little bit, people in the markets are going to be like, okay. And the further we push away from the EU and become more isolated in the world, the weaker that currency is going to get. Unless we become a criminal cabal where people can just put their money in and launder it. Maybe that's what the Tory party wants. I don't know. So what about a strong NHS? Mate, the nurses are striking because the NHS is underfunded and being privatised by stealth. This is just nonsense. And we need to recognise that the only way to be 100% sure that the Scottish NHS is safe is actually being independent. We get criticised about how rubbish our NHS is, but it's the best performing NHS in these islands. It's crazy, crazy, crazy to even consider that if we remain in this union, it's crazy, crazy to consider remaining in this union because of the threat that it poses to our NHS. You can sit there, people will sit there just now and they'll watch this back and they'll be looking at the bigger picture going, yeah, but, the SNP government in Scotland has just cut the NHS funding for Scotland, right? Do you really need a lesson in how Scotland is funded, my friend? Let me explain it once again to you. We do all our taxation. We don't collect all of our taxes. Our taxes are collected by the Treasury, and then they go into a big pot, and then by some incredible miracle of a nice little equation called the Barnett formula, the devolved nations get a fixed block grant based on spending per head of population. Now, Scotland may sometimes receive more per head of population because of the rural environment or many other reasons, but it never gets more than it puts in initially, ever. Now, you also have to consider if Westminster decides to spend less on NHS England and Wales. So let's say they're spending £100, and then all of a sudden they decide to spend £60, okay? Like taking a 40% cut in healthcare. That then is reflected on the amount of money per head of population that Scotland receives through Barnett consequentials. So all of a sudden, the pot of money in the block grant that Scotland receives is less. So for whatever services that Scotland's devolved parliament actually looks after, if for any reason the equivalent services in England and Wales get reduced in spending, it reflects on the amount of money we get for those services. So all of a sudden, our budget is less. So when people turn round and say that the SNP government in Scotland have just reduced health spending in Scotland by 500 million, you have to remember that's purely because of the cuts down in England, down in Wales, that Westminster's put in place, and it reflects directly back on the money that we get. It's vital that you understand that. What about another broad shoulders of the union thing? A great reputation for international trade. Got one word to say about that, and that is Brexit. That has done more long-term damage to trade than any other crazy-ass scheme you could possibly imagine. It has destroyed trade on these islands, unless, of course, you're Northern Ireland, which happens to be benefiting quite greatly from the Northern Ireland Protocol when it comes to having direct access to the EU. So they've got like a mini boom going on just now with their exports. It's hard to believe, hard to imagine that a wee country, an independent wee country, doing well, trading with the EU. That could never happen to Scotland, surely it couldn't. And to consider the whole crazy thing about Brexit in the first place and the opportunities that it's going to give the UK with the rest of the world is utter nonsense. Being part of something bigger with regards to trade, having that whole clout of a mass of 600 million, 700 million people, that massive market, having that there was hardcore clout. We could never replicate that clout in the UK. We don't have the same market to export the same amount of goods or to import the same. We've got nothing to offer, basically. There's nothing to offer. No reputation, no nothing. Okay, it's crazy. Right, let's think of another thing from the broad shoulders of the union. Well, we're a big hitter on the international stage with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Okay, so the international reputation is completely shot to pieces. Our First Minister has a far better reputation than Johnson did, than Truss did, and the only reason the members of COP27 seemed pleased to see Rishi Sunak is because he wasn't Johnson or Truss. The reputation is soured and tainted by leaving the EU and by crashing the pound, by having crazy right-wing laws, and by an immigration policy for asylum seekers that is just plain inhumane. The world watches the rest of the UK in awe. Well, not awe, but more like, "Aw, they used to be so good, now look at them." And about that permanent seat on the Security Council, do you really want to keep it? Do you really? Well, it's not England that holds that permanent seat. It's the UK that holds that seat. And when we are independent, when Scotland is independent, the UK in its present form no longer exists. And we will have to have a conversation about that. The rest of the UK becomes what is known as the predecessor state, and Scotland becomes the successor state. And what this means for the rest of the UK is if it wants to keep all those things that so many people see as the broad shoulders of the union, it best understand that it will be part of a tough negotiation with Scotland at the time of transition. The broad shoulders better be broad enough to take on the burdens of all those that make the rest of the UK for what it stands for. Or someone in the UN might just say, if they're not going to be the same UK again, they might just say that, hey, Britain's not Britain anymore. Should they still hold that union, that permanent seat on the Security Council? So yeah, Unionist folkies, this is actually a thing that you're going to have to consider and think about.
My name is Glenn. I have a question for you. Are you yes yet?
Okay, so that was Glenn. He is a regular across on TikTok when I was doing lives there, and he was kind enough to lend his voice to a jingle. So we've got one last video to watch tonight, and it's a more positive and direct one to show you how many Scots actually feel. Remember, we are a canny race of people that in history would not have had the wool pulled over our eyes so easily like it was back in 2014. So this next and last video is how I actually look at Scotland just now.
At least 3 different versions of people saying that the people don't want a referendum, and I would suggest politely that the people that are saying that should look at the most recent election, where 49% of the electorate wanted a referendum. Look at the last general election, where the Labour Party had their worst result since 1910 and 1 MP represents Scotland. So they're either not listening to the people because people aren't voting for you. Tories aren't listening to the people because people aren't voting for you either. Right? You haven't been in power in Scotland since 1955. Right? Maybe if you all listened to the people, then you would understand what we're saying. You guys are custodians of our country. You work for us.
Yeah, could I?
Right?
Okay, hang on. Let me just come back to.
And that's it. Usually at this time we would go into a daily affirmation and go straight into looking at tomorrow's papers. But that's something I can do without copyright breach across on TikTok. So I'm about to move this live across to TikTok and be across there in about 10 minutes time, just to hang out with the regulars and talk about this live that we've done tonight. There will not be a live again till Monday out from here, and maybe we'll be back on TikTok after the TikTok folk have had a chance to look at how I've not breached copyright. You know what? There's little pieces of music in the snippets of things that I've put there tonight, okay? And that's cool, all right? That's cool. They will come up as a copyright issue with YouTube, but I'm not monetized and I've got less than 100 subscribers here, so it shouldn't really be a problem. And if it is, do you know what? I've got no problems in taking this video down. No problems at all, because I've recorded it myself and I'm going to use this for cutting up and making for content for TikTok as well. So I will be quickly setting up the live across for TikTok in the next 5 minutes or so. So if you are watching here, go to the Saltire on TikTok and you'll see me there in about 10 minutes, I believe. All right. So yeah, thank you for joining me here tonight on the Tube of Views. Good night and good luck.